For centuries, Europe's royal families claimed they were different from ordinary people. Kings ruled by divine right. Queens were believed to possess sacred bloodlines. Entire dynasties were built on the idea that something in their very nature set them apart from the people they governed. But today, a surprisingly simple medical question raises a mystery that no palace has ever chosen to resolve. What blood type do modern royals actually have, and why? In an era when millions of ordinary people can map their own ancestry with a home testing kit, have the royal houses of Europe never once publicly answered that question? The silence is not an oversight, it is a policy, and understanding why it exists takes us somewhere most royal documentaries never go. Let's start with the science, because without it, nothing else in this story makes sense. In 1937, two researchers at Columbia University identified a protein marker on the surface of red blood cells. They named it after the rhesus monkey used in their experiments. Most people carry it. Roughly 85% of the global population tests Rh positive, meaning the D antigen is present on the cell surface. The remaining 15% do not have it. They are Rh negative. The antigen is simply absent, as though the biological instruction that produces it was never written. In everyday medicine, this difference matters most during pregnancy, where an Rh negative mother and an Rh positive child require careful clinical management. Routine, handled, unremarkable, except, it seems, when the patient wears a crown. Because when some researchers and genealogists have examined historical marriage records and population genetics together, a speculative but scientifically coherent theory begins to take shape. One that certain institutions would clearly prefer remained theoretical forever. The Basque people of northern Spain and southern France, one of the most genetically isolated communities in European history, carry Rh negative blood at rates approaching 35%, far above the global average. The logic behind this is straightforward. When a population marries only within itself for long enough, rare traits do not disappear. They concentrate. Now consider the royal families of Europe. For 5 centuries, they operated what was essentially the most exclusive marriage network in human history. A king of England might share great-great-grandparents with a Tsar of Russia, a queen of Spain, and an emperor of Germany. The gene pool was not just narrow, it was, by any modern standard, extraordinarily compressed. Some genealogists have speculated that this created similar concentrations of rare blood markers within European royal lineages. But here is where it gets interesting. Direct verification is impossible, because no hospital has ever released a verified blood type for a living European monarch. No state archive has confirmed any of these figures. The data, quite simply, does not exist in any public form. And that absence is not accidental. Think about what we actually know about Queen Elizabeth II. She reigned for 70 years. She was one of the most documented human beings of the 20th century. Her schedule, her corgis, her expressions at Trooping the Color, her opinions carefully communicated through the symbolism of a brooch. All of it recorded, analyzed, preserved in extraordinary detail. And yet the basic facts of her medical history remained, throughout her life and after her death, remarkably protected. When she died in September 2022, the official statement gave only what was absolutely essential. Her blood type was never publicly confirmed. Her complete medical records remain inaccessible. King Charles III has communicated more openly about his health than his mother. His cancer diagnosis in early 2024 was disclosed with more speed than palace protocols of previous generations would ever have permitted. That represented a genuine shift, a real gesture toward modern transparency. But even that disclosure contained no hematological detail of the kind that would resolve the central question here. The openness was real, and it was still selective, which raises an uncomfortable but entirely fair question. If King Charles III can announce a cancer diagnosis, why can something as basic as a blood type remain undisclosed? What exactly is being protected, and by whom? Now consider Prince William, 43 years old, future king, the first heir to the British throne, who has grown up in a world where genetic testing is ordinary, where genomic medicine is mainstream, where his own children could in theory learn their complete ancestry history before their 10th birthday. How William and his advisors navigate the growing pressure around royal genetic privacy over the coming decades will define whether the wall of silence built by previous generations can survive this century at all. For now, the wall holds, but the cracks are beginning to show. To understand why any of this matters beyond theory, we need to go back to one woman, and one of the most consequential acts of biological inheritance in modern history. Queen Victoria reigned over Britain from 1837 to 1901. She outlived most of her contemporaries. She married her children and grandchildren into nearly every royal house on the continent. History remembers her as the grandmother of Europe, but genetics remembers her as something more precise. A carrier, Victoria carried a mutation in the gene responsible for producing clotting factor IX. She had haemophilia B. She herself never suffered from it because the condition typically manifests in males. But she passed the gene silently to at least 3 of her 9 children. And those children carried it directly into the royal houses of Russia, Spain, and Prussia. This is where things become far more unusual than most history books acknowledge. Her grandson, Tsarevich Alexei, the only son of Tsar Nicholas II, suffered from haemophilia B with devastating severity. A boy born into the Winter Palace, surrounded by the most powerful court in the world, and yet his body could not perform the most basic biological function of healing itself from a wound. His condition defined the final decade of the Romanov dynasty. It made him the desperate focus of his parents' every decision. It opened the palace doors to Grigory Rasputin, whose apparent ability to relieve Alexei's suffering gave him an access to the imperial family that no political figure on earth could match. Some serious historians have argued, with real scholarly weight, that haemophilia B, a single genetic variant inherited from one English queen, played a measurable role in the collapse of the Russian Empire. Not as metaphor, as mechanism. In Spain, Queen Victoria's granddaughter Princess Victoria Eugenia brought the same gene into the Spanish royal house when she married King Alfonso XIII in 1906. 2 of their sons were affected. The haemophilia cast a long shadow over the Spanish monarchy for decades and contributed directly to the political instability surrounding the crown in the early 20th century. In Prussia, Princess Irene of Hesse, another of Victoria's granddaughters, brought it into the German royal line. 2 of her sons were also affected. 1 woman, 1 genetic variant, 3 empires. Real historical consequences that reshaped the map of Europe. And this is where the mystery deepens into something genuinely important. If a single hereditary trait could travel through European royal families with that kind of reach and consequence, what else has traveled with it? What other markers, common within that tightly connected network and rare in the broader population, have been quietly inherited across the centuries? We do not know. We cannot know. Because the institutions that hold that information have made a deliberate, sustained, generational choice not to share it. But one royal house breaks this pattern in a way that makes the others more conspicuous. In recent years, the Scandinavian royal families, particularly the Swedish and Norwegian houses, have adopted slightly more open approaches to health communication than their British counterparts. Not dramatically, not in ways that resolve the central question, but enough to reveal something important. The absolute silence of Buckingham Palace is not the only available option. It is a choice, made repeatedly, sustained deliberately across generations. And when you see that contrast, the silence stops looking like tradition and starts looking like strategy. Now consider what the idea of royal blood actually meant before science existed to measure it. For most of recorded European history, the legitimacy of a ruler rested not on votes or constitutions but on bloodline. The doctrine of divine right held that monarchs derived their authority directly from God. This required, as its biological foundation, the belief that royal blood was not merely different in degree from common blood. It was different in kind. The idea of royal blood once justified empires. Today, the same claim can be measured in a laboratory. That is an extraordinary shift in human history, and it is one that the surviving monarchies of Europe have had to navigate with enormous care. Because here is the tension at the heart of all of this. If royal families do carry blood markers that are statistically rare in the general population, confirming that fact reduces the sacred to the merely genetic, the mystery becomes biology. The divine becomes data. The crown becomes, in reductive terms, a hereditary medical condition. But denying it, or simply refusing to engage, preserves the ambiguity. And ambiguity, in the management of symbolic power, has always been worth more than any answer. Too much proof risks reducing the sacred to the merely genetic. Too little risks allowing the idea to fade entirely. The careful management of that uncertainty, sustained across generations with remarkable institutional discipline, serves the monarchy better than either option ever could. And this is where Queen Elizabeth II understood something that her public image never needed to state. The mystery surrounding her was never incidental to her authority. It was part of the architecture of it. Now bring this forward to the present, because the world pressing against this silence in 2026 looks nothing like the world that built it. Gene editing tools, built on CRISPR research and its successors, have moved from the laboratory into clinical application with a speed that has repeatedly outpaced the ethical and regulatory frameworks meant to govern them. As of 2026, the modification of heritable genetic characteristics remains tightly restricted in most jurisdictions. But the capacity to identify, map, and in principle preserve rare genetic markers now exists in clinical settings in ways that would have been considered science fiction 20 years ago. For an institution sitting on a distinctive genetic heritage, this creates a genuinely new category of problem. The technologies that make biological privacy harder to maintain also offer, in theory, new possibilities for exactly the kind of genetic stewardship that centuries of managed royal marriage was always attempting to achieve by far cruder means. But any engagement with those technologies requires documentation. You cannot enter a genomic medicine program without records. You cannot protect a genome you refuse to acknowledge. King Charles III, navigating his own cancer treatment within this landscape, sits at the precise intersection of personal medical reality and institutional biological secrecy. The decisions made in his medical household over the coming years, about what is documented, what is protected, and what is shared, will set precedents that Prince William will inherit alongside the throne itself. Political pressure is building from a separate direction simultaneously. Several European legislatures have opened debates, not yet resolved, about what level of health transparency should be attached to continued public funding of royal institutions. The argument is democratic and straightforward. If citizens fund the security, the medical infrastructure, the entire institutional apparatus surrounding royal health, citizens have a legitimate interest in at least the basic facts. These debates have not yet focused specifically on genetic information, but the distance between general health disclosure and hematological data is shorter in political terms than it might appear, and it is shortening every year. So here is where we land, with a question that has no comfortable resolution, and perhaps no resolution at all. Is the mystery of royal blood types a genuine biological reality? Or is it something more carefully constructed, one of the most sophisticated and durable tools in the history of institutional power? A story maintained not because it is provably true, but because the impossibility of disproving it is more valuable than any truth could be? The honest answer is probably both. The genetic logic is real. The haemophilia case establishes it definitively. Rare traits traveled through the European royal network with consequences that reshaped the political history of 3 empires. The Rh-negative speculation is unproven. It is also coherent, and it is, by institutional design, unanswerable. In the medieval period, royal distinctiveness was maintained through theology. In the early modern period, through ritual and court culture. In the industrial age, through the manufactured pageantry of constitutional monarchy. In the genomic age, through something more precise and more contemporary. Not divine blood, not blue blood in the old heraldic sense, a proprietary biological signature, protected, unconfirmed, and in its silence, somehow more powerful than any answer could be. The most durable form of power has never been the kind that can be examined and measured and confirmed. It has always been the kind that cannot quite be disproven. King Charles III carries this question into the present. Prince William will carry it into the future, and the institutions surrounding both of them will continue to make the same calculation that every generation before them has made, that the mystery is worth more than the answer. What do you think? Should royal families be required to disclose their genetic information as a condition of continued public funding? Or is there something worth protecting, even in a modern democracy, about the biological privacy of the people who carry the symbolic weight of their nations? Leave your answer in the comments, and if this story raised questions you had never thought to ask before, share it with someone who would want to know.